Hi everyone, my name's Steph Piper and I'm going to be showing you how I make my circuit board art. So you might have seen my work online before. I sell electronics kits under the name Maker Queen. So you probably might have seen this little cat kit here, and I also make little badge kits as well, which look a bit like these ones here too. And you'll notice that these look a little bit different from your standard kind of what you expect from a circuit board. And so you'll notice that this one here is designed to look a bit like an enameled pin. And what makes it a little bit special is that it's got a couple of different solder mask colors on there. So normally when you think about circuit boards, you picture things that are quite maybe a little bit boring and mostly green. And green is a solder mask color. Usually they only do one color on the board, but my kits are made with two different colors, some of them. And so I'm going to be walking you through the process of how I use different software suites to make all of this happen. And of course, I need to give credit to the amazing Alex Glow, who initially wrote up a blog on how to do this technique first. So if you've ever tried to do this before, you've probably realized that circuit board software isn't quite designed with artwork in mind. It can make it really tricky and fiddly to actually make it come together, and I need to use a few different softwares in tandem to make everything come together harmoniously. And in this video I'm going to be showing you how I did the process for making this little circuit board ruler. I'm so happy with how this one has turned out, and you'll notice that it has some little chips on there with little smiley faces, and it also has the same kind of two-tone solder mask effect as well. So what my workflow looks like now for making art circuit boards is, number one, to choose some kind of an art software. I personally use Adobe Illustrator and I prefer vector softwares for making artwork, but you could honestly use stuff like GIMP, Procreate, whatever you like that you already might be making artwork in, it'll work fine. And then I need to use KiCad software, which is the awesome free circuit board making software. And in there is a bitmap converter where it converts an image that you've made into a footprint file. And in circuit board realm, a footprint file is essentially where you might place components. So it exposes the copper and lets you solder the parts down. And that essentially allows you to make custom footprints for parts that might not be in libraries. But we're using it to make artwork instead. And after you've made these footprint files for each layer of the board, so there's going to need to be at least 4 different layers that you generally make the artwork on. You'll generally have the exposed copper layers. You'll also have any masking layers which remove solder mask from that part of the board. Then you'll also have the silkscreen layer as well. Plus you'll also have your second color as well, if you want to use that optionally. Once you've got all 4 of those files as footprints for the software, it doesn't actually let you export those into the correct layer. So then I need to open up those files into a software like Notepad++ and manually find and replace every time the layer that is not desired is mentioned with the layer that is desired. And then I can put all of those back into KiCad, polish it a little bit to make sure everything lines up perfectly, and then export the Gerbers, which can then be sent to the factory. And some of you may wonder as well, wow, what factory is she using to actually make these kinds of two-tone or two-color circuit boards? And it's no secret now that I use a company called PCB in China. So these guys will do 2 different colors on there, and you'll notice that under their advanced section of their ordering quote generation page, you can see a tick box that says two-tone solder mask. And when I do stuff like this, you also need to put like the second color that you're using, so in this case the second color is red, on a different layer that is left unused. So I might use a layer like Eco 1 or something else. If you're wondering, ECO stands for Engineering Change Order, which I don't usually use. You could put it on any other layer, as long as you describe what you're trying to do in the comments section when you place the order. So you might say something like, please use a base color green and use second color as red on Eco 1 layer. And that's pretty much the process for making your own circuit boards. So I'm going to get straight into showing you in the software how it all comes together. But if you aren't as familiar with making circuit boards as you might like, then feel free to hang around in this section for a little bit longer for more of an in-depth explanation as to some of the settings that you can be choosing. So there are a few different options that you can choose when you actually order a circuit board through a factory. And you might notice that there are different metal colors that you might see online. So the most common one is your HASL, which is your silver kind of circuit board trace color. And this one here is the cheapest one that you can get. So if you just leave everything as default, this is what you'll receive. And you'll also want to try and make sure that you choose the lead-free option as well, just for safety purposes. One of the other options that are available is OSP. I don't see this as much anymore, but I know that PCB Way does this. And OSP comes out to be a kind of a bronze color. It's not quite as shiny, and it sort of really does not hide fingerprints well, unfortunately. But it's an interesting choice as well. And the color choice that I most prefer to use is, of course, the most expensive one, disappointingly. And that is your gold, which is your ENIG, spelled like that. So that's essentially what you're looking for when you're selecting gold as a color. So there's sort of your different options for choosing what kind of copper trace you get on there. And when we say copper, obviously it's just sort of referring to what the layer is called rather than the actual metal that is used on the board itself. And on these little swatches, you can see a bit of a further breakdown as to the different layers on a board. So during the circuit board manufacturing process, essentially it's made up of different layers. So the first thing the factory starts with is, of course, the raw fiberglass board, or it's called FR4, fire resistance 4, some people call it. And you can sort of see the raw board here, in this area here, and it's just a touch see-through. So you can see a little bit as to what goes on the back there too. The next layer that's added is the gold. So our copper layer is added next, and it's electroplated on. On top of that then goes the solder mask color, which is in this case purple. And if you place solder mask on top of the metal layer, you can get a lighter version of the color. So that's a way to get an extra color essentially when you're thinking about what your artwork is going to look like. Some solder mask colors don't get as good or as distinct of a color difference when you do this, especially the stronger colors like blue or matte green, you might notice. But it does work particularly well with purple. So I have a whole stash of circuit boards that I use as like a good color guide in all kinds of different colors, so that I can make sure that I can get a visual idea of when I'm mocking up the artwork to make sure it's in the truest color that it can be, so that I can visually see what it's going to turn out to look like. You can also see kind of the color difference here in the green as well. So the lighter green has gold underneath it, and the darker green has just the raw board. So yeah, there's definitely not as much of a color variation in the green, but it still looks like little leaves, which I'm really happy with. And so lastly, the final color choice that you have on your circuit board then is, of course, the silkscreen, which is in white. Silkscreen you can also sometimes choose to be in black if you are already working on a white solder mask color, for example. And so in summary, for any standard circuit board, the maximum colors you have to work with are 5 colors. So generally when I'm mocking up the artwork then, I have the raw board as a brown, I have the metal exposed color as a gold, I have gold underneath the solder mask as a light purple, I have just normal solder mask on the board as a dark purple, and then I can finally have white, which is my silkscreen as well. It's also important to note that just your standard solder mask is not actually a layer by itself. So it's just a given that it's going to be put anywhere that you don't have mask. Same for the shiny metal layers as well. If you just put a copper layer down in the software, it needs to have the mask layer exactly on top of it if you want it to be exposed and not have solder mask everywhere. So that's pretty much your layers. And let's jump into the software and I'll show you how it actually all comes together. Okay, and here I am making the artwork in the software. So as you can see, I'm using Adobe Illustrator. And I've already made the artwork and I'm starting to make the artwork breakdowns ready for exporting to KiCad software. So you can sort of see I'm making two different versions. So on the left side, I've broken them up into the artwork for the top of the ruler. And on the right side, I've broken it up into the artwork for the underside of the ruler. I'm also breaking these into their different layers. So you can see I've got little titles there for what each of those sections represent. So I've got front copper, front mask, front silk screen, and also the extra layer, which is of course going to be my red colors as well. So I'm just labeling these to make it quite clear what I'm doing. You should be able to zoom in on the video and see what those labels are. And then the next step is to actually convert all of these colors that I've used into blacks and whites. So for each little layer section, we only want the part of the layer we want as black, and then everything else should be white, so that it is just that layer that we're working with. So for example, in these front copper layers, not just the exposed gold parts, but also the light greens are also included in those layers, because gold underneath solder mask results in a lighter green. So there's a few little clever things about the layers that we need to make sure we keep in mind as we're making these up. Lucky for us, KiCad also has a pretty fantastic little viewing tool as well, where you can see the object in 3D, you can put the real colors on there, and it means that you can make sure that what you've got is correct. So now I'm opening up the KiCad software, and I'm using the bitmap converter. And when I've exported the actual stuff from Adobe Illustrator, I've made sure that I've exported it at quite a high DPI as well. So usually I use about 900 DPI quality instead of just the standard 300 that I might use, just to make sure that the lines come out really crisp and it looks like it's good quality rather than a pixelated image. So I'm going to continue going through and doing all of these manually, so it does take a little bit of time. And if you stuff up the scale as well, which can be annoying, you obviously have to go back and start again. So making sure that it is the right scale already in the software, or you can also adjust the scale inside the bitmap converter too, just to make sure it's perfect. And here I am putting those footprint files that are made from the bitmap converter into Notepad++ as well. So in there, you'll need to go up into the Find Replace section, and find and replace usually those layer names with the correct layer. So for example, the copper layer on the front is called f.cu. And so you'll generally need to replace f.silks, which is your front silk screen, with the desired layer. You can actually see all the correct layer names on the right-hand side of the KiCad layer viewer, so you can get all of those layer names correct. In this part here, I'm now trying to just line up everything really precisely. Sometimes, I'm not sure why, but the bitmap converter just doesn't quite perfectly line up with things. And I'm sort of manually, I'm using two screens here, and you can't see what's on my other screen, obviously, but I'm using the footprint editor to actually manually push things across into position, just to make sure everything lines up really nicely. And then finally, we can see what it looks like in our beautiful viewer. To make the red on there as well, I've had to manually adjust the colors. And I think just for the preview, I've put it on the solder paste layer, because that's one of the layers that you can actually change the color on more specifically. I'm just doing some last minute tweaks here, and that's pretty much the file done and created. Once I'm done, I'll then go up into File and then press Plot. And from there, I will go and export my Gerber file, which I can then upload as a zip folder to the factory quoting website, where it should give me a little preview and let me choose those factory settings. So that's pretty much it. This was intended to just be a bit of a broad overview as to what the process and workflow is like for making this kind of circuit board art. If you need to go back and really understand the software in a bit more detail, I would highly recommend Sean Heimel's videos that deep dive and really step-by-step explain the process for making circuit boards. I certainly would not intend for this to be your first ever circuit board making video, so please make sure you go back and watch those for a little bit more detail. Thank you so much for giving it a look, and enjoy!